Good afternoon and welcome to Rediscovering the Truth. I'll be your host and teacher, Marquita Smith. I lead the Truth in the Spirit here in Newport News, Virginia, and we are continuing our series called Yeshua and the Gospels. We're going to be reading out of the Gospel of Matthew, starting in chapter 22. We're going to go through chapter 25 today. And so it's very important, these particular chapters. This session is going to be all about watching the signs. And so we're really paying careful attention to what Yeshua's been saying to prepare us for all that is to come. He's got lots of parables, lots of prophecies, a lot of very important scriptures between Matthew 22 and Matthew 25 that we really want to pay attention to and be watchful and prayerful and discerning about as we're going through it. And so just bless God that He give us all discernment, He give us all wisdom, and shalom and His rest and peace, which are all found in shalom, as we're going through these scriptures, so that we might be encouraged, so we might be enlightened, but not discouraged or afraid. We're hopeful, we're watchful, we're excited about what the Lord is doing. And so I pray that you will receive that through this teaching as you're watching the signs. Now we're going to start in Matthew chapter 22, and I'm reading out of the Complete Jewish Bible because we're revealing the Jewish Messiah. And so as you read out of the Complete Jewish Bible, there is additional revelation that you receive that sometimes got missed in some of the other translations because they were really looking at the scriptures through the Greek mindset or the Greco-Roman mindset, but not always through the Jewish mindset. And though the other three Gospels were written originally in Greek, Matthew was written originally in Hebrew and Aramaic. However, it was translated very early on into Greek, and then all the others were just written in Greek to sort of eliminate that middleman. But we know when the Gospels are written, they're quoting the words of Yeshua to a largely Jewish audience. So he would have been speaking Hebrew and Aramaic. And so the words that are in Greek would have come originally out of the original Hebrew. And so when he spoke them, when Yeshua spoke them, they were Hebrew or Aramaic. Aramaic being more of the colloquial language of the time, and Hebrew being more of the scholarly language of the time. And he would have been speaking those two languages as he spoke throughout the Gospels. And the Jewish culture that he was speaking to has lots of colloquialisms and sayings and phrases, just as every culture has, that if you take them out of the Jewish context, you kind of miss what the Lord is saying. And so we're really looking at the Jewish Messiah in the Jewish context through that sort of Hebrew lens or Jewish lens, as we're looking at it through the Complete Jewish Bible in the Hebrew language is being highlighted. So a lot of the Hebrew words that he would have originally spoken are in the Complete Jewish version, which is another reason why I really like it. And I'll help you to understand those as well, so that we can really see what Yeshua was saying, get an understanding of all that is to come. Now starting in Matthew 22, verse 1, and we're continuing on from last week. Yeshua is in the same conversation. It says, Yeshua again used parables in speaking to them. The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding feast for his son. But when he sent his slaves to summon the invited guests to the wedding, they refused to come. So he sent some more slaves, instructing them to tell the guests, look, I've prepared my banquet. I've slaughtered my bulls and fattened cattle, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding. But they weren't interested and went off, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest grabbed his slaves, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was furious and sent his soldiers who killed those murderers and burned down their city. Then he said to his slaves, well, the wedding feast is ready, but the ones who were invited didn't deserve it. So go out to the street corners and invite to the banquet as many as you can find. The slaves went out into the streets, gathered all the people they could find, the bad along with the good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. Now, when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there was a man who wasn't dressed for a wedding. So he asked him, friend, how did you get in here without wedding clothes? The man was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, bind him hand and foot and throw him outside in the dark. In that place, people will wail and grind their teeth, for many are invited, but few are chosen. Now, this particular parable is actually going to set the tone for pretty much everything else in Matthew 22 through 25. It's going to really reveal way more than most of us have recognized when we first read it. Now, some things we get very clearly, that the king who is preparing the wedding feast for his son is Father Yahweh. He is the creator, Elohim, Adonai, the Father, God the Father. is clearly the king. He's the king of everything, king of the universe, the great I am. So he is the king in the parable. His son, of course, is Yeshua. Father's name, Yahweh. The son's name, Yeshua, Yah saves. And this is clearly that relationship that's being revealed, the king and his son. So his son is about to be king. He's preparing for kingship, and he's prepared a wife for him. Now, Yeshua starts this parable saying the kingdom of heaven is like. So we see clearly that there's going to be lots of elements that describe the kingdom of heaven in this parable, where it's not just representing the relationship of the Father and the Son, or Israel and Yeshua. There's so many other relationships represented here. So we got to look at a lot of elements. So we see here that the Father is sending out his slaves. In other versions it says his servants, just to give us a better understanding of slave at the time. It wouldn't have been like the slaves that were here in Western civilization with generational slavery. These slaves would have been servants who were maybe indentured servants and things like that. Those would have been the slaves, which we look at more like servants, which is why in most versions it says servants as opposed to slaves, because the Western mindset of slavery is different than the Middle Eastern mindset of slavery. But the original term was slavery. So we have here these slaves, and these slaves were sent out to share with those invited guests, these specially hand-chosen invited guests for this wedding. Now the slaves or servants are going to be the prophets, the teachers, those who went forward with the word of God, knowing Messiah is coming. So Moses would have been one of those slaves. Elijah would have been one of those slaves. Isaiah would have been one of those slaves whom the king of Israel saw it into. And so we understand clearly that the servants of the Father who were sent out to tell people the message that the son was coming and he was going to be married, that they were mistreated. The prophets, of course, are mistreated. Yeshua says it very clearly that a prophet cannot be killed outside of Jerusalem. So it's not until Jerusalem that he's going to get persecuted, because he knows in the holy city, which it is ordained to be the holy city, but of course lots of unholiness has happened and is happening there. The Lord is saying that is where the greatest persecution of God's people actually happens, particularly those who are his servants or his slaves. They've sold themselves to the Lord. They're sold out for him. They're not going to be bonded to or connected to anything else, because they serve the Lord wholeheartedly. So these are those who brought the message forth that the son is about to get married. Very important. But they've been mistreated. Now the Father has prepared this wonderful feast. In the wedding feast, we understand that the wedding feast is going to come at the end of the age when Yeshua is with his people, living with his people forever. We know that Yeshua is this wonderful banquet is prepared, where it's a season of feasting. It's not just one day, because the Jewish wedding would have been a 7-day feast cycle, 7 days of feasting. And so it's going to be a complete cycle, a complete period of time where Yeshua is with his people, wedding his bride, who of course is the body of Messiah, the body of believers throughout the world, whether they be Jew or Gentile, but believers are going to be that bride. And we see that in various other places, Ephesians 5, and throughout other scriptures, that we understand that who the bride is. Now, the guests who are supposed to come to the wedding are going to be the children of Israel. And you see, of course, that many of those guests did not come. Many weren't interested. They went to their farm, they went to their business, and then some mistreated the slaves. So some, of course, were completely indignant, and then others just were aloof and just, preoccupied and distracted and didn't come. And it's going to speak of the children of Israel at the time of Messiah's coming, because we know just a few chapters into Matthew that Yeshua is going to be handed over and crucified at the choice and at the urging of the religious leaders, who then coerce the people, who then really force the hand of the Romans in power at that time to crucify Yeshua. So this is who are those original wedding guests, those who've been invited and who, of course, do not want to come. Now, of course, we know not all the children of Israel rejected Yeshua, because his first disciples were children of Israel, the first apostles, the children of Israel. Everybody who wrote a scripture or wrote a book in the Bible, of course, is a child of Israel, with the exception of Luke, who heard from children of Israel. That's where he got his accounting from. And so it's very clear that all the children of Israel didn't reject Yeshua. But you understand, for the most part, the nation did reject Yeshua. And he says not only, in verse 7, it says, the king was furious and sent his soldiers who killed those murderers and burned down their city. That is a prophecy about the coming destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, which we're going to see again in Matthew 24. Yeshua is continuing to speak of what is to come, not just in our age, but he was speaking of what was going to come in the first century as well. So you see that this destruction of Jerusalem is being prophesied here in verse 7 as well. Then you see that everybody is now allowed to come in. Those who are in the highways and the byways, the good and the bad. So these are people who would not have been noble people. They wouldn't have been of royal lineage, because the king, if he was going to invite people to the banquet, it would have been people out of his kingdom who were of that noble royal lineage, who would have been prepared and know how to behave and how to prepare for a wedding. This would be the children of Israel. They've been prepared for thousands of years prior to the coming of Messiah as to how to receive Messiah. This is what Moses did, Elijah did, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. This is what all the prophets did, was to prepare the children of Israel for the coming of Messiah. And so you see, of course, that they would be those who are the nobles, who are the people of standing that receive that first invitation. Now, during Yeshua's day, a king would have sent out 3 invitations. There was the one initial invitation saying, come to the banquet. There was another invitation saying the banquet is being prepared. And then the servants, as they were doing that, they would have been clearing out the roads so that the people could come to the banquet, to the king. And that, if the king were to make a procession or anything, that the roads would be clear for the king as well. And so in that second one, you got roads being prepared and people are being confirmed. Yes, the banquet is still on. The third invitation is to say the banquet is now here. It is now ready. And we see here that when it says in verse 4 that the king sent more slaves, instructing them to tell them that I prepared the banquet, that's going to be your third invitation. Because now, not only is he saying, I'm going to have a banquet, we've cleared the roads for the banquet, but now the banquet is here. And so this is the time of the coming of Yeshua. This is the time, that third invitation is the time of the coming of Yeshua, where the other 2 invitations had already been sent out. Moses has sent out invitations, and the major and minor prophets had sent out invitations. So the first and the second invitations had already gone out. The third invitation is Yeshua is here. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's the third invitation. It is here. The banquet has been prepared. Come and join in with the bridegroom. Yeshua even calls himself the bridegroom when he's speaking to Yochanan's Talmudim, or John's disciples, John the baptizer. When he's speaking to them, he says, and they ask, how come we all fast and the Pharisees fast and you guys don't fast? And he says, the guests can't fast while the bridegroom is with them. But when the bridegroom leaves, then they'll fast also. And so that was a feast, a wedding feast that he was having with those disciples, that they were in a place of feasting as opposed to fasting. But we know a final wedding feast is going to come at the end of the age as well. And so most of the prophecies have sort of a dual meaning, the first coming and the second coming. We see Yeshua speaking in that way here as well. Now, they go out into the street corners and everywhere, and they find as many people as they can in verses 9 and 10, so that the wedding hall is full. And this is going to be the inclusion of the Gentiles, that the nations are brought in, so that now there have been Jew and Gentile invited to the feast. Now, of course, at this point in time, the Gentiles don't really know how to prepare for a noble wedding feast in honor of the son of the king, who is the king of all the universe, because the Gentiles, for the most part, were just even getting to know the idea that there was one God and that he sent a Messiah, the anointed one, who is fully God, fully man, God in the flesh, to the earth, to really reclaim back that authority that we had lost to our sin. And so Gentiles are just getting whiff of this, but they're still invited to come into the kingdom. And that invitation to come to the wedding feast is an invitation to salvation. When people are invited to the wedding feast, they're invited to receive the Lord for themselves. They're invited to receive the king and his son, who's also a king, to receive them for themselves. And so everybody comes excited. They may not know really what they're getting into, those who are in on the street corners and the highways and the byways, but they're excited because the king has invited them. And so you see there's a wonderful, overwhelming response. Now, when I share with you that there are 3 invitations, during those invitation times, a king would have also sent out royal clothing to everyone he invited. In which case, it would have been color coordinated for the color of the party, and it would have been to the liking of the king for the purpose of the party, so that when people came, they were dressed in the clothes that the king had actually sent out to them to match up with everyone else in the wedding party. Which is somewhat of where we get our ideas from of a wedding party, and the brides and the bridegroom, they're all dressed alike and stuff like that. It certainly is a tradition that's very, very old. In the United States, we've changed completely But you see here, the king was sent to all the invited guests. He would send clothes out, wedding clothes, to all the invited guests. So when they came, they were dressed similarly and in a way that pleased the king, because this was really important. Kings in that day didn't allow things to come before them that didn't please them. So no one who was mourning, no one who was unkempt, no one who was diseased, no one who was sad was allowed to come into the presence of the king. And so at a wedding, the king's son's wedding, the king sent out the clothing that he preferred. And everyone wasn't able to afford to do that, but the kings did. And so the king would have sent out wedding clothes with one of his invitations. As the people received the invitation, they would have received the wedding clothes, and they would have been prepared. Now, Revelation teaches us that the fine linen stands for the righteous acts of the saints. What's important to note here is that these wedding clothes are also a metaphor of righteousness, being clothed in righteousness. And you'll see that in various scriptures, in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, but also in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, that there's lots of scriptures that talk about being clothed in righteousness, wearing righteousness. Paul even talks about the full armor of God in Ephesians 6, and what we put on, the salvation and the truth and the righteousness and all of this. And Isaiah talks about the Lord himself wrapping himself with righteousness and zeal and salvation. And so these things become important metaphors that we understand that these wedding clothes are not about an outward preparation for Messiah to come, but it's more about an inward preparation. The fact that this gentleman here, who clearly is a Gentile because he wasn't a part of the original wedding party that was invited, he's a part of those who are on the street corners, the highways, and the byways who were brought in. This gentleman, the Gentile, who has come, as he was invited, in the same state he was in, did not prepare himself for the wedding feast. Now, this is an important revelation for us to say that the Lord himself gets us wherever we are, highways, byways, near, far, good, bad, wherever we are, the Lord will come and get us. He will come and redeem us. He will just pull us up right out of where we are, just rescue us from our situations and circumstances. But there is a requirement of us to allow him to transform us. There should be a change in our holiness, a change in our righteousness, a change in our thinking, a change in our paradigms and in the way we view life, and a change in our outward manifestation, because there's been a change in our heart and our mind. Which is very important, because this gentleman, he accepted the invitation but did not allow the fact that he was coming to a royal banquet change him. He did not prepare himself by putting on the wedding clothes that the king himself sent out. He didn't have to go buy new clothes. The king would have prepared him for the banquet, just as the Lord prepares us. Yeshua is returning. He's coming again very soon. And he himself has sent out the invitations and even the wedding clothes, the righteousness that we can put on. We are made righteous by the blood of Messiah. You see that very clearly in Isaiah 53, that by his stripes we are healed, and all the transgressions and the punishments that should have been laid upon us were laid upon him. And so we see that he took upon himself all of our filth and our sin so that we might be made righteous, whole and holy in the presence of the Father. But if we don't receive that righteousness, if we don't receive those wedding clothes, if we don't receive that preparation of our spirit, our soul, in order to be justified, in order to be accepted, in order to be in right standing at this wedding banquet, we will be cast out. So this gentleman who's received the invitation to salvation is now still being thrown into Valley Gehinnom, or Gehinnom because Guy means valley, thrown into Gehinnom, the valley of Hinnom, or the valley where they burn the rubbish, which is also going to be the metaphor of the lake of fire. So he still goes to hell, even though he received the invitation for salvation. Now that's a scary fact. That's a scary fact, because a lot of people like to believe that if you receive an invitation from the Lord for salvation, you pray the prayer that you're saved. That's all you have to do for the rest of your life. That's what this gentleman believed, and when he showed up at the wedding feast, he was sadly mistaken, because he had not allowed the fact that he was being invited to a royal wedding change him. It hadn't changed him. It hadn't changed his mind. It hadn't changed his heart. It hadn't changed his righteousness or his holiness. Therefore, his outward manifestation of wedding clothes wasn't changed either. He still had on his filthy rags at the wedding feast of the king's son. Not acceptable. And that's important for us to really, really realize, no matter where we are, no matter who we are, whether we come from the highways and the byways as Gentiles, or whether we're part of the royal lineage and the original wedding party, those who are of the noble lineage of Abraham, it doesn't matter. The king sends out wedding clothes, And if we accept the invitation to salvation, then we've got to accept that invitation worthily and put on the clothes he sent us, which are righteousness. The clothing of righteousness. We got to wear our tzedakah. It's not all about giving charity in our acts. We have to be clothed in tzedakah. We have to be clothed in righteousness. That not just our outward appearance will be righteous, but that our soul, our hearts, and our minds will be righteous. And Yeshua's been saying that this whole time. He's been saying that throughout all of Matthew, to make sure that your heart and your mind is right. Make sure that you're in right standing here with the Lord, not just outwardly. And we see that in this example with this gentleman, which is why this particular session is all about watching the signs, because if you don't really look deeply into this parable, you will miss that. You will miss the call to righteousness. There's a call to salvation. But then there's a call after that salvation call, a call to righteousness, a call to holiness. And if we don't answer the second call, we're still going to find ourselves thrown out, cast out of the kingdom of heaven. We have to answer the first call of salvation. Then we also have to answer the second call to righteousness and holiness. And this parable makes that very, very clear. Now, Matthew 22, verse 15. Then the Parashim, or the Pharisees, went away and put together a plan to trap Yeshua with his own words. Now, I'm going to tell you, they realized that they were the people in the parable who received the first invitation and didn't accept it and wanted to do something else and, killed all the slaves. They recognized that he was speaking that against them. So now they're upset and they're trying to trap him, just as he's been really convicting them with his parables. Now they're trying to find a way to trap him with his own words, because his words are the words of power. So they said, let's try to use his words against them. And this is what they're going to try to do. Verse 16. They sent him some of their Talmudim disciples and some members of Herod's party. They said, Rabbi, we know that you tell the truth and really teach what God's way is. You aren't concerned with what other people think about you, since you pay no attention to a person's status. Now, they're really offended by the fact that he doesn't do that, but they're saying it like it's a compliment right now. So tell us your opinion. Does Torah permit paying taxes to the Roman emperor or not? And Torah, of course, is going to be the first 5 books of the Bible, the Law of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. As you'll see in other versions, it'll say, does the law permit? But specifically, it was speaking of Torah. Not the rabbinical law, not the laws of the land, but the Torah. Verse 18. Yeshua, however, knowing their malicious intent, said, You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used to pay the tax. They brought him a denarius. And he asked them, Whose name and picture are these? The emperors, they replied. Yeshua said to them, Nu, which means indeed, or it's to draw attention that he's about to make a contrast. Give the emperor what belongs to the emperor, and give to God what belongs to God. On hearing this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. So in that way, they weren't able to trap him, because of course you're supposed to sow into God's kingdom. That's in the Torah. But the Torah does not say you should not pay taxes. So he's saying you should do both. Do both. Pay, sow into the kingdom, pay your tithes and give your offerings. But also, if you're required to pay taxes in the land, pay the taxes of the land as well. They were trying to make him either an enemy of God by breaking Torah or an enemy of Caesar. They were trying to make him choose, and he didn't pick either. Verse 23. That same day, some Zedukim, or Sadducees, because they're going to be the sons of Zadok, the priest prophesied in Ezekiel to be the only priest who could come back before the Lord, which is why they didn't like the Pharisees, because they weren't even of the Levitical line at all. But the Zedukim came to Yeshua, came to him. They are the ones who say there's no such thing as resurrection, so they put him to a shelah. And a shelah is going to be a query, a test. Verse 24. Rabbi, Moshe said if a man dies childless, his brother must marry his widow and have children to preserve the man's family line. And that's actually in the scriptures. That's in the law, Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 through 6. And then they're going to continue with their question of him. There were 7 brothers. The first one married and then died. And since he had no children, he left his widow to his brother. The same thing happened to the second brother, and the third, and finally to all 7. After them all, the woman died. Now, in the resurrection of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all married her. Now, this is a question they used to use, the Zadokim or the Sadducees used to use to stump the Pharisees, because the Pharisees didn't have an answer for them. Because the Zadokim, the Sadducees, only studied the Torah, the law of Moses. They don't study anything else, not the rabbinical laws, not even the rest of the Tanakh, the prophets, the writings. Not that they don't read them, but the Torah is the only thing that's law. It's the only thing they believe wholeheartedly. Everything else is more of suggested reading or good reading. As to where the Pharisees believed in all the Tanakh, as most of us do today, and then we add the Brit Hadashah, which is going to be the New Covenant. So what becomes important here is that they've always been able to stump the Pharisees who believe in the resurrection. And Yeshua, of course, has been teaching on the resurrection, so they know that he believes it too. Because his teachings, Yeshua's teachings, were much more closely related to those of the Pharisees than to the Sadducees. The Sadducees were way limited as to where the Pharisees really studied heaven and God's character and God's ways. And they went a little far with additional rabbinical teachings and rabbinical laws that were not in the Torah. But Yeshua's doctrine, his halakha, was a lot more like that of the Pharisees. So the Sadducees are picking it up. And they're like, well, let's see if we can stump him the way we stumped these Pharisees, because they don't have an answer to this. And here's Yeshua's answer in verse 29. Yeshua answered them, the reason you go astray is that you're ignorant, both of the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, and of the power of God. And so he's saying, what you guys should know, you don't know. Verse 30. For in the resurrection, neither men nor women will marry. Rather, they will be like angels in heaven. And as for whether the dead are resurrected, haven't you read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzhak, and the God of Yaakov. He is God, not of the dead, but of the living. And so what he does is he sticks to the Torah, because that's Exodus 3:6 that he's quoting. He sticks specifically to the Torah to prove to them that there's a resurrection of the dead. He doesn't go outside the Torah to the Nevi'im, the prophets, or the Ketuvim, the writings, because that's what the Pharisees did. The only way the Pharisees could prove that there was a resurrection was to read other scriptures, like Job talks about it. The Psalms talk about it. Lots of scriptures talk about resurrection, but in the Torah, there's not specific reference to the fact that there is a resurrection, which is why the Sadducees didn't believe in it. But Yeshua uses the very thing that they study and saw as foundational, which is the Torah, and it is foundational. But all of the other writings are also important, that we understand them. The prophets and the other writings, very important. But he uses that and sticks strictly to that to prove to them that there's a resurrection of the dead, because he knows that's what their real question is. Is there a resurrection of the dead? And they're not even really questioning, they're just trying to prove him wrong, because they figure they already know the answer. He's saying that you don't know the Tanakh and you don't know God either. You're missing that power of God. Verse 33 of Matthew 22. When the crowds heard how he taught, they were astounded. But when the Parashim, the Pharisees, learned that he had silenced the Zadokim, the Sadducees, they got together, and one of them, who was a Torah expert, asked the Sheila to trap him. This is going to be an inquiry, a test. And it's interesting, because they should have been happy that he finally silenced those Sadducees, but they weren't. And now they've got a common enemy, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, which is Yeshua. And now they're all against him as opposed to being against each other, which they used to be. Verse 37. This is what verse 36. This is what the Torah expert is saying to Yeshua. Rabbi, which of the mitzvot, or laws, and the Torah is the most important? He told him, you are to love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. That's going to be in Deuteronomy 6:5, and that's part of the Shema. You start with the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and then you go into that you should love your God, the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And he's quoting that. So the Shema is going to be the very first and most important commandment out of Deuteronomy 6, is where you're going to find it. But then he says another one. This is the greatest and most important mitzvah, commandment, or law. Verse 39. And a second is similar to it. You are to love your neighbor as yourself. Now that's going to be out of Leviticus 19:18, which is very important because many people think Yeshua made that up in the Brit Hadashah, but that is in the Torah, to love your neighbor as yourself. That was always the heart of God. He didn't change or invent it at the time of Yeshua's coming. Yeshua came to express the heart of God to us. That was always God's heart, that we would love our neighbors as ourselves. Verse 40. All the Torah and the prophets are dependent on these two mitzvot, which is going to be these two commandments, these two laws. Then turning to the assembled Parashim, Pharisees, Yeshua put a Sheila to them, a question, a test, an inquiry. Tell me your view concerning the Messiah. Whose son is he? They said to him, David's. Then how is it, he asked them, that David, inspired by the Spirit, calls him Lord, when he says, Adonai said to my Lord, or Adonai said to my Adonai, sit here at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. And that's going to be Psalm 110, verse 1. Verse 45, continuing in Matthew. If David thus calls him Lord, how is he his son? No one could think of anything to say or reply, and from that day on, no one dared put him to another Shelah. Now, this is going to be very important because Yeshua has taken all their questions and answered them beautifully. And now he has a question of them that they can't answer. Because the Torah and the rest of the Tanakh, the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, they do prophesy that the Messiah is the son of David, as in descendant of David. But what he's saying is that David said that the Messiah was his Lord, which means existed before him, ruler over him. So he said, if the Messiah is to be the descendant of David, why did David call him his master, his ruler, and one who came before him? It's a good question. Because he is the fruit, son, and the root, beginning of David. So David comes from Messiah, and then later on Messiah comes from David, which is something that they could not understand because it is not true of humans. Human lineage is straight. Father, son, grandson, great-grandson, it's a straight line. But in God, there is infinite possibilities. And Yeshua came from infinity as God himself and then down into the human lineage. So he did exist before David. David came out of Yeshua. And then Yeshua went into the line of David and came into the world. So he's actually both. He's David's Lord and he's David's son. Which is very interesting. He's David's father, and he's his also his fruit, which is very interesting. But they couldn't get that because they were missing that power of God that Yeshua said to the Sadducees. They were missing the heart of God, understanding the power of God and the infinite ability of God to do whatever he can imagine. Things that we can't even conceive of, as Isaiah 55 makes very clear to us. His ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. Now we're going on to Matthew 23. Then Yeshua addressed the crowds and his Talmudim, that's going to be his disciples. The Torah teachers and the Parashim, he said, sit in the seat of Moshe, that's Moses. So whatever they tell you, take care to do it. But don't do what they do because they talk, but don't act. Remember, he's already called them hypocrites. They tie heavy loads onto people's shoulders, but won't lift a finger to help carry them. Everything they do is done to be seen by others, for they make their tefillin broad and their tzitzit long. That's going to be, the tefillin is going to be the example of binding the scriptures on your forehead and tying them on your hand. That's a tefillin, which is actually scriptural, that it says that you would bind the law on your forehead and on your arm, meaning that the law would always be with you, always in your mind, always in your heart. That left arm is always in your heart. And then the tzitzit are going to be, that's a plural for tzitzit, which is going to be the tassels that Numbers 15 tells us to put on the edges of our garments. And so what he's saying is they're doing these things to make people see their righteousness, which we already talked about. See, that was a sign that we saw earlier in the parable, that outward righteousness was not as important as the inward righteousness, that the right standing in our hearts was most important. Yeshua is now explicitly speaking this, though he spoke about it in a parable earlier on. Now, it says, going back to verse 5, it says, everything they do is done to be seen by others, for they make their tefillin broad and their tzitzit long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogues, and they love being greeted deferentially in the marketplaces and being called rabbi. Clearly, this is a rebuke. Yeshua is a warning. He's saying, don't be like this. But you are not to let yourselves be called rabbi, because you have one rabbi, and you are all each other's brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, because you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to let yourselves be called leaders, because you have one leader, and he is the Messiah. The greatest among you must be your servant. For whoever promotes himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be promoted. And so he's speaking again of that servanthood, that servant spirit, that servant leadership that he has modeled for them and that he's already drawn them to and called them to. And us too as well. Verse 13. But woe to you hypocritical Torah teachers and Parashim, Pharisees, for you are shutting the kingdom of heaven in people's faces, neither entering yourselves nor allowing those who wish to enter to do so. Now, there's also an additional verse which wasn't in some of the original manuscripts. It says, woe to you hypocritical Torah teachers and Parashim, for you swallow up widows' houses while making a show of davening at great length. And this is going to be preaching and praying at great length. Because of this, your punishment will be all the worse. And so while they're robbing the widows of their money by telling them to give everything to the temple, and the widows are becoming destitute, they're preaching and praying at length so that people would think that they are these great people, which is just, kind of missing out on what the Lord himself is really drawing them to do, what's really in his heart for them. All right, I'm going to continue to verse 15. Woe to you hypocritical Torah teachers and parashim! You go about over land and sea to make one proselyte or one convert. And when you succeed, you make him twice as fit for Gehinnom as you are. And Gehinnom is going to be the valley of Hinnom, the place where they take outside of Jerusalem and burn up the trash. Jerusalem, which means cities of shalom, wholeness, rest, and peace. Jerusalem is going to be that picture of heaven, because we know that the New Jerusalem is going to come out of the sky just like a bride for her bridegroom. This is Revelation 21. And so something that's taken outside of Jerusalem and burned up is going to be taken into the fires of hell, or the lake of fire, which you see very clearly here is what he's speaking of, really that lake of fire at the end. Verse 16. Woe to you, you blind guides! You say if someone swears by the temple, he's not bound by his oath. But if he swears by the gold in the temple, he is bound. You blind fools! Which is more important, the gold or the temple which makes the gold holy? Very important. He's pointing out the way that they made distinctions that are completely outside of God's heart. Verse 18. And you say, if someone swears by the altar, he's not bound by his oath. But if he swears by the offering on the altar, he is bound. Blind men! Which is more important, the sacrifice or the altar which makes the sacrifice holy? So someone who swears by the altar swears by it and everything on it. And someone who swears by the temple swears by it and the one who lives in it, which is Father Yahweh. And someone who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and the one who sits on it, which is God himself. So he's telling them to be very careful, because they're teaching people incorrectly. Teaching people really to have a disdain, a disrespect for the holy things of God. This is what's happening. He's rebuking them sharply, because they're supposed to be teaching people the difference between the holy and the common. They're supposed to be teaching people how to revere a holy God, how to come into his presence. Verse 23. Woe to you hypocritical Torah teachers and parashim, Pharisees! You pay your tithes of mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the weightier matters of the Torah, justice, mercy, trust, or faith in other versions. These are the things you should have attended to without neglecting the others. Blind guides, straining out a net, meanwhile swallowing a camel. So what he's saying is, you're trying to follow the letter of the law with regard to your tithes, but you're missing the heart of God and breaking a whole host of commandments. Like profaning his name, profaning his altar, profaning his temple, robbing the widows. These are horrible sins that they're committing, but they want to make sure that they're careful to tithe, is what he's saying. And that's an important revelation for us too. We don't get to pick and choose the parts of the Bible we want to keep. If we love the Lord, we're going to follow all of his commandments, and he's going to say that very clearly to us in John as well. So we want to tithe. We shouldn't neglect the tithe. It says you should have attended to these things without neglecting the others, meaning you should certainly tithe, but be sure that you are just and merciful, and that you trust the Lord and you have faith in him as well. Don't give up those things, those virtues, just to do the letter of the law that you think is the parts that you think are important. And many of us do it. We sort of cherry pick the word of God. We pick the parts we like, throw back the parts we don't like, and that is not an option for us. Verse 25. Woe to you hypocritical Torah teachers and parashim! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of robbery and self-indulgence. Again, inward heart. We're looking at the inward heart, not just the outward manifestation. This is what Yeshua is saying. Blind Perush, which is a Pharisee. It's a singular form of Pharisee. First clean the inside of the cup so the outside may be clean too. So like, get your souls in order, and then you will look holy to everybody, because you will actually be holy. And that's a word to us as well. Verse 27. Woe to you hypocritical Torah teachers and parashim! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look fine on the outside, but inside are full of dead people's bones and all kinds of rottenness. And those dead things were, of course, unclean. A priest would never touch them. And since the Pharisees were behaving like priests, they are not the priestly line, but they lived their lives as if they were priests, they would have considered that unclean, the dead bones and the rotting flesh. But he's saying inside you're unclean. You look good on the outside, but all you're doing is hosting uncleanness inside. Verse 28. Likewise, you appear to the people from outside to be good and honest, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and far from Torah, far from the laws of God. That's exactly what I've been talking about. Verse 29. Woe to you, hypocritical Torah teachers and Parashim! You build tombs for the prophet and decorate the graves of the Tzaddikim, which are the righteous people. And you say, had we lived when our fathers did, we would never have taken part in killing the prophets. In this you testify against yourselves that you are worthy descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead then, finish what your father started. And of course they're going to do that by crucifying Yeshua. Verse 33. You snakes, son of snakes, how can you escape being condemned to Gai Hinnom, which is the valley of Hinnom? That's going to be that lake of fire, the final place of judgment. Verse 34. Therefore I'm sending you prophets and sages, these are wise people, and Torah teachers. Some of them you will kill. Indeed, you will have them executed on stakes as criminals. Some you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so on you will fall the guilt for all the innocent blood that has ever been shed on earth, from the blood of innocent Havel, which is going to be Abel, to the blood of Zechariah ben Berechiah, which is Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Yes, I tell you that all this will fall on this generation. And Zechariah, son of Berechiah, is going to be the last person to die in the Tanakh. When you look at the way the Tanakh is organized, it's not the same way that our Bible is organized. You'll see that the very last martyr in the Tanakh was this Zechariah, whose father had been a priest, who had helped the king, but the king then he rejected his father's words, and when his father died and Zechariah came forth to convict him, the king had him stoned to death. And so right there between the temple and the altar, he had him stoned to death, a priest's son and a prophet. So this becomes really important to recognize that what Yeshua is saying from the beginning of the Torah to all the way to the end of the Tanakh, every righteous person that was killed, all that blood is falling on your generation. Why? Because Yeshua himself is more righteous than any of these. And so when they bring Yeshua forth to the Romans to be crucified, they're bringing on more judgment on themselves, this final judgment. And that's what he's saying. He's predicting what's to come, which you see again, there's lots of prophecies here. So we're watching for signs to see what's going to happen. And he's making clear to them what's going to happen. You're going to have me killed, but all of the righteous blood that has ever been spilled is going to fall on you. That righteous blood you've been repenting of, saying that if you've been around when your fathers were alive, you wouldn't have killed those people. You're about to kill somebody holier than them, and all of that blood is going to be on your hands. This is what he's saying. Yes, I tell you that all this will fall in this generation. Now we're going to talk about Jerusalem. Remember the city that was burned up by the king in the parable at the beginning of chapter 22? Now he's going to prophesy about it. Verse 37. Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim. That's Jerusalem in original Hebrew. You kill the prophets. You stone those who are sent to you. How often I've wanted to gather your children just as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you refused. Look, God is abandoning your house to you, leaving it desolate. For I tell you from now on, you will not see me again until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, or blessed is he who comes in the name of Adonai. And originally it said, Baruch haba b'shem Yahweh. Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh, which is a really, really, really important understanding, because Yahweh is the name of God. And when you see Adonai or Lord in all caps anywhere in your Bible, it means that in the original text, it actually said the name of God, which is Yahweh, Yod He Vav He. But in order to keep the commandment and not take his name in vain, in all of the translations of the Bible, the name of God has been taken out, and Lord in capital all caps, or Adonai, which means the same thing as Lord, in all caps, has been put in its place, so that we don't actually say the name of God out loud. But Numbers chapter 6 tells us at the end of the Aaronic blessing that we're to speak the name of God over the people, that his people would have his name on us. So that's very important to note, that God actually wants his name on us. He wants us to speak his name. He just doesn't want us to misuse or blaspheme it. But out of care and cautiousness, the name of God has been removed out of our Bible so that people would not forsake that name or misuse that name and break that commandment. So they just have taken the name of God out. So originally it was blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh, and Yeshua, which means Yah it means Yah saves, comes in the name and in the power and the authority of Yahweh. And he's the only one that comes in the name and the authority and the power of Yahweh. He brings salvation, redemption, deliverance, so that we might have that relationship with Yahweh ourselves, that we can come to Yahweh ourselves. We can be close to Yahweh. Yeshua comes in the very form and likeness of Yahweh, though he comes as a man. He comes as a man because Yahweh gave dominion on the earth to humans. You see that in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. The dominion on the earth is humans. So a human had to take that authority back from the enemy that we keep surrendering every time we sin. But only a completely righteous human could do it, and there's none righteous except the Father. Yeshua said it himself in last week's teaching. There's none good but the one. So the Father had to become flesh, had to become a man, that he might redeem us, draw us back to himself, and take the authority back on the earth that we've given over to the enemy, which is why we have all these sins and the chaos happening in the earth, these terrible tragedies and atrocities. It's because of our sin, not because God is asleep at the wheel or anything. He's allowed us to take the driver's seat, and we've kind of handed that driver's seat over to the enemy, and the enemy is the one who's destroying what God gave to us. So God sent Yeshua in his image, in his likeness, in his ways, in his power, in his authority, his son, that he might redeem the earth for the Father and for us, and also draw us back to the Father in right relationship. So we've got to see that he has come in the name of the Father, the name, which is Yahweh. He's come in the name of Yahweh, which is what the original text said, because right here he's quoting Psalm 118:26, and that said Yahweh. When David first spoke that psalm, he said Yahweh. Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh, Baruch haba b'shem Yahweh, which is very important to recognize, because Yeshua is the only one that comes in the fullness of Yahweh, his name, his power, his authority, the only one. And he's the only one that can fulfill that. And so there is no other Messiah but him. If anyone fulfills 2 or 3 scriptures, it doesn't matter, because no other person can fulfill this one, coming in the name of Yahweh. Yeshua does. And that's why Yeshua, his name Yeshua, is so important, because Jesus doesn't have the name of Yahweh in it at all, but Yeshua does. Yah saves. That's what Yeshua means. And he's coming in the name of Yahweh. So it's so important that the name of Yahweh is in and on him. That we don't take the name of Yahweh out. And when we call him Jesus, we've taken Yahweh's name out and actually put in something else, which takes the focus off of God and onto something else. That's Greek culture and Greek idolatry. And we don't want to shift our focus off of Yahweh when we're thinking about his salvation. We want to see Yahweh through the eyes of Yeshua, through the man of Yeshua, which you see in his name, Yeshua. Chapter 24, which is a really important one. We're going to continue on about Jerusalem, because he's just saying what's going to happen to Jerusalem, that he wants to gather Jerusalem like a hen gathers her chicks, but Jerusalem isn't willing. Why? Because he knows what's coming. He knows that he's going to be crucified right outside of Jerusalem. They're going to take him into Jerusalem, then they're going to take him right outside of Jerusalem to crucify him. And so he knows that when he approaches Jerusalem, that's when his time is coming, and that it's in Jerusalem that he's going to meet his end, as so many other prophets did before him. And then we also see that it wasn't his will that Jerusalem would be left to this fate, but it's saying God is abandoning your house to you and leaving it desolate, which takes it right back to the parable that we saw in Matthew 22. That's why the city is going to be burned by the Roman soldiers, because God has left it. The Spirit of God has left it. The temple curtain was rent. The Spirit of God left out of the most holy place. He left the temple at the time of Yeshua's crucifixion. You'll see that at the end of this book, at the end of Matthew, I think in our next lesson, and maybe next week. And when he leaves, that means that the enemy can then come in and do whatever he wants. And of course, the enemy wants to steal, kill, and destroy. So that's what he does. He destroys Jerusalem. He destroys the temple. You see that that's exactly what happens through the Roman soldiers, the Roman government at that time. Now, chapter 24. As Yeshua left the temple and was going away, his Talmudim came and called his attention to its buildings. But he answered them, "You see all these? Yes, I tell you, they will be totally destroyed. Not a single stone will be left standing." And he's talking about all the temple, the buildings at the temple, because there was the temple itself, and then they had the priest rooms and the side buildings for the offerings and things that were in the storehouse, the possessions, the valuables that were left in the storehouse. And then Herod had built up even more around the temple. And what Yeshua is saying is that all this is going to fall down. Not one stone is going to be left there. And Josephus actually talks about the fact, he's a Jewish historian. He talks about the fact that when they set the temple on fire, the golden wall started to melt, and it was covering bricks. And so all the gold was going down into the bricks. And as the gold was melting and going down to the bricks, the Roman soldiers were separating the bricks and beating the bricks apart that they could get the gold that was seeping down in between the bricks as the temple melted from being burned. And so literally Yeshua's prophecy was completely fulfilled, that every brick was turned over, every brick was removed to get all the gold that had started to melt down in between the bricks. So the very thing he's saying, not metaphorically but specifically, is actually going to happen to Jerusalem in his near future. But then of course we know it happened in 70 AD, which is in our past. Verse 3. When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, and this is going to be right outside the old city of Jerusalem. You have to go through Guy Hinnom, the Valley of Hinnom, to get to the Mount of Olives. Verse 3. It says, when he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the Talmudim came to him privately. Tell us, they said, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign that you are coming? And that the Olam Hazeh is ending. That is the current age. This current age is going to be ending. So they're looking for signs. Now, he's been talking this whole time. He's been giving signs this whole time. But people are missing it. So now they're asking more questions because they want to know. And we too should want to know. Yeshua replied, watch out. Don't let anyone fool you. For many will come in my name saying, I am the Messiah. And they will lead many astray. And we've seen many of them actually. In our day and in days in the past. You will hear the noise of wars nearby and the news of wars far off. See to it that you don't become frightened. Such things must happen. But the end is yet to come. For peoples will fight each other. Nations will fight each other. And there will be famines and earthquakes in various parts of the world. All this is but the beginning of birth pains. That's going to happen during that first century is what he's talking about now. This is still first century stuff. He hasn't even got to the end of the age, which is closer to our time. It's in our generation. Verse 9. At that time you will be arrested and handed over to be punished and put to death. And all peoples will hate you because of me. Now we see that actually happening in the book of Acts. We see the persecution in Jerusalem. We see the scattering of the believers outside of Israel. And then later on we know what was coming. It didn't happen yet in the book of Acts, but we know in the future, in the near future, was going to be the destruction of the temple. And so we see that these are this is the times he's talking about. He's talking to them about their very near future. Things that will happen in their lifetime. Verse 10. At that time, many will be trapped into betraying and hating each other. Many false prophets will appear and fool many people, and many people's love will grow cold because of increased distance from Torah. Now, it's so interesting because, of course, these things are happening in our day, but they were happening in their day as well. So again, as I was telling you about the last parable, we see things being fulfilled once and then also being fulfilled again. Those things that happened the first time he came are happening again as we see that we're preparing for him to come again. Very important. But you see, false prophets, Paul actually writes about them in his letters. So we know that that was happening during their time. You see that people's love is growing cold. Paul talks about people that he had to hand over to Satan to be taught not to blaspheme. He talks about people who have risen up against him and done him great harm. He talks about people that are preaching the gospel in spite of him. So we see lots of people's love is growing cold. And then others are being distanced from Torah as they add additional laws which are not in Torah, or as they really commit apostasy and pull completely away from Torah and say the Torah is obsolete, no more, we don't need to listen to it, we don't need to read it, we don't need to believe in it, which is completely a teaching of anti-Messiah, because according to the book of Daniel, only anti-Messiah wants to change the set times and the laws and the Torah and defames God and sets himself against his people. So whenever we pull ourselves away from the things of God, the law of God, the seasons and set times and dates that he set apart in the Torah, then we are actually being used by anti-Messiah. You see that actually through believers, those who call themselves believers, standing against the word of God itself. And that happened in Paul's day. It happened in the first century. It happens in Acts. It happens in the letters that Paul writes and Peter writes and James and Jude, especially Jude. But we see also it happening in our day as well as we're preparing for Yeshua to come back. Verse 13. But whoever holds out to the end will be delivered. That means the end of your journey on this earth till you die, or the end when he comes for us. Because we know that the dead in Christ will rise first. Then also those who are still alive will meet them together in the air. We see that in 1 Thessalonians 4. And then we see that also in Revelation, very clearly that the Lord draws his people up to be with himself in Revelation 20. Verse 14. And this good news about the kingdom will be announced throughout the whole world as a witness to the Goyim, that's the nations, the Gentiles, is what it literally means, is the Gentiles. It is then that the end will come. So, he's tracked history from the first century all the way to where we are now. And this is why people are sharing that good news and tracking where the good news has been spread, because it says it in verse 14 that the good news about the kingdom will be announced throughout the whole world, and then the end will come. So we're at a place where people keep saying the whole world has been evangelized at this point. Everyone has heard the gospel. Or some people say there's only certain groups, like in the Amazon, in South America, or a small group that's in Central Africa, in the Congo, that they've not been able to reach. Indigenous groups that never have heard the gospel. But soon as they get to those groups, it'll be the whole world. But we are either there, where the whole world's been evangelized, or we're very close, depending on the statistics that you believe. But this is in our day that these things, that this good news has been announced throughout the whole world. Verse 15. So when you see the abomination that causes desolation, spoken about through the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand the allusion, there will be the time for those in Yehuda to escape to the hills. If someone is on the roof, he must not go down to gather his belongings from his house. If someone is in the field, he must not turn back to get his coat. What a terrible time it will be for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that you will not have to escape in winter or on Shabbat. For there will be trouble, then worse than there has ever been from the beginning of the world until now, and there will be nothing like it again. Indeed, if the length of this time had not been limited, no one would survive. But for the sake of those who have been chosen, its length will be limited. Now, this is going to be important because he has actually just captured the last 2,000 years in these three little verses. When he talks about, actually 15 through 22, when he talks about the abomination that causes desolation, he's speaking of two things. The first is going to be when Rome comes and takes over the temple. Because when they come to take over Jerusalem and they break through to the temple, they defile it. Just as they did just before Yeshua's day when the Maccabees had to come in and re-cleanse it. They defile the temple. So the abomination that causes desolation is Roman here, just like it was right before Yeshua's time. Because Daniel actually speaks of three different instances. The one with the Maccabees, where Antiochus for Epiphanes comes in and defiles the temple. The one that happens in 70 AD. And then he talks about the end of the age, the one that's going to happen in our time. But you see very clearly that Yeshua is speaking of their age at this particular point, verse 15, 16, 17, because what he's saying, even 19 and 20, because he's saying you will have to run out of Israel. This is not about the flight that takes place when we meet the Lord in the air. He's talking about packing up belongings and running away. And this is what the children of Israel had to do during the time of Rome's destruction of Jerusalem. There was a literal fleeing. This is not a spiritual flight. This is a natural flight of packed bags running away. And that's why he said it will be horrible for nursing mothers, because it's really hard to run when you're nursing a baby or if you're pregnant. You see what I mean? This is just a hard time. So he says it will be really hard for them because you're packing up belongings and trying to get out and dodge quickly so that you're not killed, because many were killed. Then he also says you better pray that it doesn't happen on Shabbat, because if it happens on Shabbat, you're having to grab your belongings. You're breaking the Shabbat to run away because you're carrying all of your stuff and fleeing. You're not resting. You're not worshiping God. You're carrying burdens, and you're tremendously burdened because you see that your temple is being destroyed. And so this is what Yeshua is speaking of, the literal destruction of Jerusalem. And a time like this is going to happen again. Zechariah actually talks about it in Zechariah 14, when it's coming again. When the nations are going to surround Jerusalem, you'll see that it's going to come, and then Messiah himself is going to show up. So we'll see it happening again, where there'll be a literal flight out of Jerusalem, not a natural, not a spiritual flight, not a being caught up together with the Lord. This is talking about Jews leaving Judah, in flight because the enemies have come to overrun the land. And he's saying that there's not going to be another time like it, because he's speaking of the whole 2,000 years. And in the whole time, we've got the first flight out of Judah. We've got pogroms. We've got the Shoah, or the Holocaust, persecution. For the next 2,000 years, and even into today, we see horrible atrocities happening to Israel. Even with the Gaza war right now, the bombing just all the time. People of Israel living always in terror, always in fear, running back and forth to a bomb shelter. Can't be more than 15 seconds away from a bomb shelter, or you and your family might be destroyed. That is a horrible life to live. It's a horrible fear all the time, and anxiety. This is what Yeshua is speaking of. This whole season, it's a 2,000-year season of this terror upon Israel during this time where the enemy wants to destroy them, because he knows that Yeshua just said, we just read it in Matthew chapter 23, verse 39, that Israel, he says, you will not see me here again. You, children of Israel, will not see me here, Jerusalem, again, until you cry, you, children of Israel, Baruch haba b'shem Yahweh. Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. Until the children of Israel recognize Yeshua being sent of Yahweh as Messiah, he's not coming back. And until he comes back, the enemy is going to try to destroy Israel all the way up until Yeshua comes back, to make sure they never get a chance to recognize him and call him back. Because it's not the Goyim who call him back. It's not the Gentiles who call him back. It's Israel who calls Yeshua back. And so the enemy goes into this crazy, relentless pursuit of the children of Israel to try to stop them from even existing, so that they cannot ever call Yeshua back to rule the world from Jerusalem. This is why Jerusalem is so contended for, because he says, if I can keep Jerusalem out of Israel's hands, I try to destroy Israel, but if that doesn't work, keep Jerusalem out of Israel's hands, either way, they can't call them back from Jerusalem, because the children of Israel have to call them back from Jerusalem. This is a big deal. It's prophetic. It has to happen. That's the sign that we're looking for. And as you see Jews coming to faith and to believing, as you start to see the children of Israel receiving Yeshua, not Jesus, not the Greek Messiah, but the Jewish Messiah, start to receive Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah, start to call the Jewish Messiah back in the land of Israel, look up, because your redemption is drawing near. And those are the times that we're in right now. Our redemption is drawing near. Now, let us look at where we're in verse 23. Verse 22, he says the time is going to be limited. I'm so glad, because we know our days are shortened. We can look at the amount of work we're able to accomplish for the kingdom, for our lives, for ourselves, and it's tremendously shortened, because the days are getting shorter and shorter. Literally, the days have gotten shorter since that earthquake. We know that even before that, just the Kairos timing was shorter. It just is not, we're not getting as much done. But it's also limiting the amount of persecution the enemy can do to us as well. That's part of the point. Now let's look at verse 23. At that time, if someone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe him. For there will appear false messiahs and false prophets performing great miracles, amazing things, so as to fool even the chosen, if possible. There, I have told you in advance. So if people say to you, listen, he's out in the desert, don't go. Or look, he's hidden away in a secret room, don't believe it. For when the Son of Man comes, it will be like lightning that flashes out of the east and fills the whole sky to the western horizon. Wherever there's a dead body, there you will find the vultures. Now, that is a Hebrew idiom, which I remember for years. I was like, why would you put that in there, Lord? What does that have to do with anything? And he's just saying this is a sign. Vultures are a sign of a dead body. If you see vultures circling, there's something dead there. That's the point. He's like, that's a sign. If you see vultures circling, there's something dead there. They're not going to circle and gather unless there's something dead. In the same way, you're going to see the signs of the Son of Man. It's not going to just be, well, I'm wondering if that's him. I think that's him. Let me search the scriptures and see if it's him. Oh, it's going to be in your face. It's going to be ever present. It's going to be completely clear. The Son of Man is here. The Son of Man is coming. The signs are always before us. And this is what he's saying. It's going to be prevalent to the whole world when he comes the second time. It's not going to be like the first time, announced with a star and an angel singing on the mountains, and shepherds know, and the wise men know, and Mary and Joseph know, and everybody else is not sure, is he the right one? No, it's not going to be like that. The whole world is going to see it. The whole world is going to know. The choice is going to be whether we would submit to his leadership, submit to his rulership, or whether we're going to fight against him. Because in Zechariah 14, it says that they're going to make war against the Son of Man. They're going to make war against the rider on the horse. You see that in Revelation 19 also. So clearly, just because he shows up doesn't mean everybody's going to believe in him. They're going to fight against him. Some people, those enemies of God, enemies of Yahweh, are enemies of Yeshua. If we love Yahweh, we love Yeshua. If we love Yeshua, we love Yahweh. They cannot be separated. So it's very important for us to note that the relationship we have with the Father is the relationship we have with the Son. The relationship we have with the Son is the relationship we have with the Father. And those who are estranged from Yeshua, because he comes in the name of Yahweh, are also estranged from the Father. There is no relationship with God the Father, the creator of heaven and earth, without having a relationship with Yeshua. It's not possible, because they are one and the same. They are echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. He is one. The Lord our God is one. Echad. Complete, whole, one. Not two, not divided. One. And that's important that we understand that. And that's the very first and most important commandment. That we get that. Now, let's keep going. Verse 29. But immediately following the trouble of those times, The sun will grow dark. The moon will stop shining. The stars will fall from the sky, and the powers in heaven will be shaken. Now he's quoting from a couple different prophecies here. We got Isaiah 13, Ezekiel 32, Joel 2, 3, and 4, Isaiah 34, Haggai 2. And so we see that these same words are spoken a lot of times in the Tanakh among the prophets, the Ketuvim, the Nevi'im, or the prophets. And you see that these signs are being repeated over and over, that we're looking to those heavenly bodies, the celestial systems, to see that there is something happening in the heavens to show us. These are signs. Not that we worship them, we're watching. The blood moons are signs. We got 2 blood moons and unleavened bread. We got 2 coming up Sukkot next year, 2 in unleavened bread, and 2 in Sukkot. 2 each year, the beginning of unleavened bread, the beginning of Sukkot, and then again the 2 the next year. That's a serious sign. On the feast days, why? Because he's taking us back to his Torah. He's taking us back to his commandments, his word, his ways. Very important. Verse 30. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. All the tribes of the land will mourn. And that's Zechariah 12, 10 through 14. And they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with tremendous power and glory. And that's going to be Daniel 7, 13 through 14. He will send out his angels with a great shofar. That's going to be Isaiah 27, 13. And we see, of course, that Paul talks about it again in 1 Thessalonians 4 as well. And they will gather together his chosen people from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other. We see that also in Revelation 20, where Yeshua is saying, at the end of all of this, that 2,000-year period of challenges that he just spoke about, which we're in, you're going to see the Son of Man, and all this is going to happen. The nations are mourned. He's coming on the clouds. The shofar is going to sound. His people are going to be gathered together. And that shofar sounding is going to be the fulfillment of Yom Teruah, the day of sounding the shofar. It's also called Rosh Hashanah, but it's not biblically Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah means head of the year. It's not head of the year. It's Yom Teruah, the day of sounding the shofar. It is the beginning of the 7th month, not the beginning of the 1st month. Because in the 7th month is when we're finding the fulfillment, the completion. The fall feast follow the spring feast. We got to have the crucifixion. We got to have the cleansing and unleavened bread, the crucifixion and Passover, the cleansing and unleavened bread, the resurrection, and first fruits. We got to have all of that. We got to have Shavuot, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. Then we come to a day of sounding the shofar, which is Yom Teruah. And this is what's being fulfilled here, because the fall feast days are the ones that are left yet to be fulfilled. Verse 32. Now let the fig tree teach you its lesson. And when its branches begin to sprout and leaves appear, you know the summer is approaching. In the same way, when you see all these things, you are to know that the time is near, right at the door. Yes, I tell you that this people will certainly not pass away before all these things happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. And so these people is the generation that comes out of the Talmud. That's the body of believers. This season of believers, this dispensation of grace, this part of this time of history that we're in is not going to pass away, because we're in it. And it's in the fulfillment of this time that we're going to see the Son of Man. And the fig tree is a lesson. You look at it, you watch it, you see the branches, they're getting tender, you know, okay, the fruit is coming. This is exactly what he's saying that we need to be watching, what's happening in the world. Watch Israel, watch the signs in the heavens, and we'll know that Yeshua is on his way, which he is. Verse 36. But when that day and hour will come, no one knows, not the angels in heaven, not the Son, only the Father. For the Son of Man's coming will be just as it was in the days of Noah. Back then, before the flood, people went on eating and drinking, taking wives and becoming wives, right up till the day Noah entered the ark. And they didn't know what was happening until the flood came and swept them all away. It will be just like that when the Son of Man comes. Then there will be 2 men in the field, one will be taken and the other left. There will be 2 women grinding flour at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Now that's going to be when we're caught up together with the Lord, the sounding of the shofar. He was just talking about 1 Thessalonians 4, Revelation 20. All of this is what he's talking about here. That is when that flight, that spiritual flight takes place, where God's people are caught up together with him. That's not the same as what happened early on in Matthew 24. Okay? Now it says, so stay alert, because you don't know on what day your Lord will come. But you do know this, had the owner of the house known when the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you too must always be ready, for the Son of Man will come when you are not expecting him. Now, it doesn't matter that he's saying watch the seasons, so we should know the seasons. We should know it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, like a countdown. But we're not going to know the exact moment. We're not going to know the hour. We're not going to know the day. And the reason that's important to note is because that means every day we've got to be prepared to receive him, to love on him, to be his people. Every single day we've got to search after him in his ways every single day. And this is what he's saying, because you don't know when he's coming. Don't take a day off from your righteousness, because when he comes, he's going to need to see you clothed in those wedding clothes, that righteousness inwardly, that it would also manifest outwardly. Verse 45. Who is the faithful and sensible servant whose master puts him in charge of the household staff to give them their food at the proper time? It will go well with that servant if he's found doing his job when his master comes. Yes, I tell you that he will put him in charge of all he owns. But if that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is taking his time, and he starts beating up his fellow servants and spends his time eating and drinking with drunkards, then his master will come on a day the servant does not expect, at a time he doesn't know, and he will cut him in two and put him with the hypocrites where there will be wailing and grinding their teeth. And that, of course, is the valley of Hinnom, that lake of fire, where he's cast out. He was a part of the kingdom. He was a part of the household. He was used by God, which means he probably was some type of minister, because servant also means minister. Minister also means servant. So he was some type of minister in the household of God. The Lord just said that those who want to be first to be last, and you got to make yourself a servant. So he's talking about people who are serving in the kingdom. Cast out. Why? Because they're not doing what he would have them to do at all times. They've thrown off that bond. They've thrown off that covenant. They're not connected to him anymore during this time. What do I want to do right now? And if he comes at that moment, it's going to be bad for them. Chapter 25, and we're going to end with chapter 25, but I want to go through this one for you because it actually talks about the very thing that we were just talking about now. He's got a few more parables. You're going to see quite a few parables here, and these are such a blessing because they're going to tell us the same things that we've already been learning. These parables will. Chapter 25. The kingdom of heaven at that time will be like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went out to meet the groom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were sensible, or wise. Other versions say wise. The foolish ones took lamps with them, but no oil, whereas the others took flasks of oil with their lamps. Now the bridegroom was late, so they all went to sleep. It was the middle of the night when the cry rang out, "The bridegroom is here, go out to meet him." The girls all woke up and prepared their lamps. The foolish ones said to the sensible ones, "Give us some of your oil because our lamps are going out." "No," they replied, "there may not be enough for both you and us. Go to the oil dealers and buy some for yourselves." But as they were going off to buy the oil, the bridegroom came. Those who were ready went with him to the wedding feast, and the door was shut. Later the other bridesmaids came. "Sir, sir," they cried, "let us in." But he answered, "Indeed, I tell you, I don't know you. So stay alert, because you know neither the day nor the hour." Now, this is going to be so important because all of them fell asleep. They were all servants of the Lord, all in covenant love relationship with the Lord, hence the lamps. Because he already called us a light. He called us a light in Matthew 5. So hence the lamps. They're in relationship. They got a light. But they didn't bring the oil. They didn't keep that light going. He already talked to us about the 4 soils. Maybe the seeds were being eaten up by the enemy. Maybe the seeds were being choked off by the cares of life. Maybe the fruit that was going to go forth couldn't because the roots were shallow. They weren't rooted deep in the ground. They were in that rocky path, so they weren't able to find roots, which is going to be that deep faith that they need to get through challenges, trials, and circumstances. This is going to speak of falling away. In that I was zealous. I loved him. I had a light. I was sharing him. But the enemy came. Life showed up. Circumstances hit. It was hard. And I pulled away from serving the Lord. I pulled away from loving on him, from representing him to his people, being a light to the nations. I stopped doing it because I was weary and well doing, and I walked away from the calling upon my life. That is what this speaks of. People often talk about that oil and the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, which is very real. The more I come back to Lord in relationship, the more oil I get. And I've got to keep that relationship oil there, or I will become embittered. My love will grow cold. I will fall away and be distant from Torah. It's very easy to happen among believers. It's happened for 1,700 years now among the church. Very important that we realize that oil keeps us well lit and able to share that truth and be the representation, the true representation of the God of Israel. Not the God of Greece or Rome, not any other pagan idol, not the idols of our flesh or circumstance or convenience or our culture, but the God of Israel. Very important. When we represent him, he gives us more oil that the light can stay on, that we can continue to be a light. He gives us the oil in worship, he gives us the oil in Bible study, in prayer, in fellowship, in confession, in transparency before him and sometimes others as well. That's how we get more oil. So we want to keep that oil, stay in tight relationship, intimate, passionate relationship with the Lord. And if it feels like your light is going dim, your zeal, your passion are going down, go back to him and ask for more oil. Get away from everything else. Spend time with God and get your oil. Because when he comes, you're going to need to be well lit. You're going to want to be on fire for him when he comes. Because if we're distracted by anything, if we've got unconfessed sin that is just drawing us away from him, lifestyles of sin, habits of sin, when he comes, our eyes are going to shift like Lot's wife, and we won't be looking to him. We'll be thinking about what we're missing in this life. And as soon as our eyes shift off of him, in that split second, we're not with him. We won't be caught up together with him. Don't let that moment, don't let other distracting thoughts, goals, desires, cares, worries keep you out of the relationship with God. Because he said that my yoke is easy and my burden is light. He does not bring trouble to our lives. It's the enemy and the sin that's in the world and in our lives and in others around us, but not him who does it. Now, let's look at verse 14. For it will be like a man, this is another parable. For it will be like a man to leave home for a while who entrusted his possessions to his servants. To one he gave 5 talents, equivalent to 100 years' wages. To another 2 talents. To another 1 talent. To another each according to his ability. Then he left. The one who had received 5 talents immediately went out, invested it, and earned another 5. Similarly, the one given 2 earned 2. But the one given 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned to settle accounts with them. The one who had received 5 talents came forward, bringing the other 5, and said, Sir, you gave me 5 talents. Here I've made 5 more. His master said to him, Excellent! You're a good and trustworthy servant. You have been faithful with a small amount, so I will put you in charge of a large amount. Come and join in your master's happiness. Also, the one who had received 2 came forward and said, Sir, you gave me 2 talents. Here I've made 2 more. His master said to him, Excellent! You're a good and trustworthy servant. You have been faithful with a small amount, so I will put you in charge of a large amount. Come and join in your master's happiness. Now the one who had received 1 talent came forward and said, I knew you were a hard man. You harvest where you didn't plant and gather where you didn't sow seed. I was afraid, so I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, take what belongs to you. You wicked, lazy servant, said his master. You knew, did you, that I harvest where I haven't planted and that I gather where I didn't sow seed? Then you should have deposited my money with the bank so that when I return, I would have at least gotten back interest with my capital. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. For everyone who has something will be given more, so that he will have more than enough. But from anyone who has nothing, even what he does have will be taken away. As for this worthless servant, throw him out in the dark, where people will wail and grind their teeth. And we know again, that's Guy Hinnom, the valley of Ben Hinnom. He was in the house, didn't serve, didn't produce fruit. Remember, we talked about that with the soils. This is early on in Matthew. The 4 soils. The soil that had the good ground, the seeds were sown into it. It took root and it sprouted up fruit 30, 60, 100-fold. Those other ones produced fruit 100-fold. This guy didn't produce any fruit. No fruit whatsoever. He buried it and then came back and gave it back. That's like having a gift from the Lord. A talent, an ability. Never using it. And then when he comes to you, he says, well, if you want to take singing back, take singing back. If you want to take writing back, take it back from me. Wicked servant, I gave you that gift to bless the whole world. Write that the world would know me. Sing so that the world would know me. Dance so that the world would know me. So that I can get an investment, get a return back on my investment in you. Every gift I've given you, the world is supposed to know me better through your gifts so that I get a return back on my investment. And if they don't know me better through your gifts, then you wasted that gift. And when you try to give it back to me, I'll take the gift back. But I'm going to throw your soul into the lake of fire, which is the valley of Hinnom. But we don't want to go there. So again, it's not just about, am I spending time privately with him? It's also about, am I using what he gave me to bring glory to him, to bring people to him, so that other souls will be saved? Because not only do I not want to go into the valley of Hinnom, I shouldn't want other people to go there either. And if I use my gifts to bring him glory, then it's snatching other people out of the fire as well. Verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, accompanied by all the angels, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be assembled before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates sheep from the goats. The sheep he will place on his right hand, and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you whom my Father has blessed. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you from the founding of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you made me your guest. I needed clothes, and you provided them. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me." Then the people who have done what God wants will reply, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and make you our guest, or needing clothes and provide them? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" The king will say to them, "Yes, I tell you that whenever you did these things for one of the least important of these brothers of mine, you did them for me." Then he will speak also to those on his left, saying, "Get away from me, you who are cursed. Go off into the fire prepare for the adversary and his angels." And that is going to be the lake of fire, Valley Hinnom, or Guy Hinnom. You see that in Revelation 20. That at the end of 19, the beginning of 20, they get thrown into that lake of fire. Very important, because later on at the end of 20, the people go right into the same lake of fire. Those people who have not been committed to the Lord. Very important. This is what he says. "For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. Thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. A stranger, you did not welcome me. Needing clothes, and you did not give them to me. Sick and in prison, and you did not come to visit me." Then they too replied, "Lord, when did we see you hungry, thirsty, a stranger, needing clothes, sick or in prison, and not take care of you?" And he will answer them, "Yes, I tell you that whenever you refuse to do it for the least important of these people, you refuse to do it for me. They will go off to eternal punishment, but for those who have done what God wants, they will go to eternal life." Now this is going to be really important for us to understand all these signs and parables that he's given today, because sometimes we read the scripture and it doesn't relate. I don't know how to relate to that to myself. I don't know how to apply this word to me. But he's given these parables, these signs, these models that we can go, "Oh, I see that." Is it about my relationship with him and my worship? Yes. Is it about using my gifts that I would be a blessing to him, bring glory to him, bring other people to him? Yes. Is it about compassion, mercy, kindness shown to others that they might bless God for what I've done for them? Yes. It's about all of that. That's what those parables are all about, that it's about all of those things. They all bring a return back on his investment in breathing life into us and creative ability and making us in his own image. It's more than just being saved. The wedding clothes that we talked about in chapter 22, those are so important because they manifest themselves in those three ways. That I tell people about him, I use my gifts for him, I'm compassionate and merciful, and I give to other people, and I worship him inwardly. I have an intimate and passionate relationship with him. All of those things are going to be my wedding clothes. All those things are my acts of righteousness. All of those things are going to demonstrate the fact that not only am I saved, but I'm doing something with my salvation that's going to bless him. We can't just sit back on our laurels and be glad that we're saved from hell, because if we do and we don't give him glory, we really won't be saved. We're really not saved, which is really, to me, the most important sign in all of these chapters. What I should be doing with my salvation, so that when he comes, I'm not that wicked servant. I'm prepared. He's pleased with me, and I'm able to enter his happiness, which is to be a part of that wedding feast. I want to be a part of the feast. I hope you want to be a part of the wedding feast. And I want to give you some additional reading. I usually give some additional reading so people can go back and they can read more about what we're talking about here. And we want to go back to this parable. And I want you to go with me. Let me see. Not that psalm. I'm going to go to the other psalm. I want you to read out of Psalm 110. That whole psalm, that's going to be your additional reading in Psalm 110. That whole psalm is going to show you the king and his son. You're going to see this beautiful analogy of David sort of watching on with the Father, conversing with Messiah back then, because David saw Messiah, Job saw Messiah, Balaam saw Messiah. I mean, people back in the Old Testament, the Tanakh, they saw Messiah. They had a vision of him, an understanding of him. Moses saw him. Elijah saw him. So read Psalm 110, and you'll see that even back then, there was this vision of the fact that he was coming and what he was going to do. We need to have that in our hearts, because it's another sign to help prepare for the age that is to come. I hope to see you next week as we continue further in this teaching. Be blessed.